This course is sponsored by the USAA Foundation. We'd like to thank the USAA Foundation for their generosity in making this course possible.
Approximately 1 in 5 Americans live in rural areas of the country, and these Americans join the military at higher rates than their counterparts in urban communities. And since they often return home after service, we see a large number of military caregivers in rural America. These rural caregivers and their veteran care recipients experience unique challenges that make them different from their urban counterparts. Even in the face of these challenges, however, many choose to stay in rural areas because of the unique benefits that rural life affords them. Hello, and welcome to the course, Caregiving in a Rural Setting. I'm your instructor, Sherrie Wilcox, an assistant professor at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. I received my PhD in Health Promotion and Behavior from the University of Georgia, and I have engaged in military-focused research for over a decade. By the end of this course, you'll be able to 1. Discuss the major considerations of caregiving in a rural setting, and then 2. List 5 techniques in self-care that are vital for caregivers everywhere but can be especially important for military veteran caregivers in rural areas. If you are providing care to a veteran in a rural setting, or if you're interested in some of the challenges and considerations of rural caregiving, then this course is for you. Let's start off by defining the word rural. We often use the word rural when we're describing a place in contrast to the large metropolitan areas. These larger urban areas tend to include more extensive labor markets and contain far more people than rural areas. For this presentation, rural will be defined as the more geographically isolated areas of the country which have fewer jobs, fewer people, and fewer resources available than nearby metropolitan areas. Some of the obstacles that rural caregivers and their veteran care recipients may experience revolve around the distance from the more resource-dense urban areas. For example, rural areas tend to be further from many important resources such as medical, community, and social resources. This includes, but is not limited to, military and veteran services such as VA medical centers, clinics, and veteran centers. This distance often results in receiving more limited care in a rural setting where providers may not know much about military culture or military benefits. And as a result, efforts to access care or necessary services may require additional time and resources and may require the caregiver to invest extra time in navigating the maze of benefits and services. This distance can also lead to a lack of social support, as other caregivers and family or friends may be located quite a distance away from the rural caregiver. It comes as no surprise then that these caregivers and their veteran care recipients can feel a sense of isolation. They may also feel misunderstood by or disenfranchised from their communities. It is in this context that one would understand why the people in rural communities tend to experience more overall problematic health status than their counterparts within the general population. Despite these challenges, the benefits of rural caregiving for veterans can outweigh the difficulties experienced by those providing care in a rural setting. For example, the location where caregiving takes place may be more familiar to the veteran than an urban area, or it could even be the original home of the care recipient. This setting could also be more peaceful and quiet than an urban environment. The rural setting may be close to family members and crucial members of the social network and other social support resources. While some services may be more distant, other services may be more accessible and easier to attain. For example, a close family doctor as opposed to a packed urban hospital. In addition, there has been recent legislation such as the Veterans Caregiver and Omnibus Health Benefits Act, which sought to improve health care for veterans in rural areas. If rural caregivers experience unique challenges and obstacles, what do they need in order to improve their situations? Some of the needs of rural veteran caregivers may not be different from other groups of military caregivers. One of the needs often stated by rural caregivers is that of more tangible support. So this can come in the form of social support, financial assistance, material goods, or even help with transportation. Another need often expressed by rural caregivers is some method to reduce the burden of caregiving, such as through respite care. Respite care is an essential benefit that caregivers should take advantage of. It allows caregivers to take short, planned breaks so that they can attend to other important aspects of their life. Caregivers can also benefit from learning about and using tools and trainings to improve their confidence and self-efficacy associated with being a caregiver. Since a major challenge for rural caregivers is the distance from resource-dense urban centers, they may need better access to resources with military culturally competent providers and staff. They also need appropriate and consistent healthcare services for their care recipient as well as for themselves. We've talked quite a bit about the needs of rural caregivers, so let's go into some depth about the needs of rural veteran care recipients. A primary need of care recipients in rural settings is access to health resources, such as family physicians, emergency departments, and pharmacy services. This includes VA benefits, resources, and facilities. These are especially important because the providers and staff members at these locations need to be more aware of military culture. It's also in the interest of the rural veteran care recipient for their caregiver to be in good health and have access to sufficient resources. These resources include social support and connectedness. Care recipients across the country from vulnerable and underserved groups can experience disparities in access to health care. Health disparities include differences in access and use of health care, the quality of care, and even the cost of care. These can be very real issues for rural veterans and their caregivers who have limited resources. Examples that might help explain some of these disparities in rural settings include limited transportation, compromised air or water quality, lack of information exchange, or lack of cultural competency. It is vital to consider the location in which caregivers and care recipients live, work, and learn to be able to understand the extent of people's abilities to comply with clinical recommendations. This can relate directly to the health and well-being of rural veterans and their caregivers. As a rural caregiver of a veteran, self-care is vital to the everyday role of caregivers. Caregivers tell us that they can feel overwhelmed with their many responsibilities, and they often put their own needs to the bottom of the list. However, the more someone ignores their own needs, the more they might struggle with their own exhaustion and health issues. This can directly impact one's ability to effectively provide care to the veteran care recipient. So, what can caregivers do to ensure that they have the best possible position to care for the veteran in their life? First, it is imperative that they actually take time for themselves and do something for themselves. This could be as simple as arranging respite care so that they can take a couple hours to do something that is meaningful to them. Whether it is using time to go to a cafe and read a book, take a class, be physically active, or spend time with family, friends, or other caregivers. Many times, caregivers tell us that their favorite hobbies and leisure activities are neglected as they juggle their caregiving responsibilities. It is often remarkable to them how much better they feel by giving themselves the simple gift of time every once in a while. Second, take into account their own physical and emotional health, as well as that of the care recipient. For example, make time to go for a walk and embrace the natural, serene environment of rural America. Practice mindful meditation or write in a journal about experiences as a caregiver. Third, seek peer support and connection. This may be found in a group setting with one trusted individual or through an online or virtual community or setting. The caregiver should find at least one confidant to trust and to give themselves permission to tell that person the truth about how they're really feeling. Fourth, identify and address the cycle of negative thoughts and feelings that can be overwhelming at times. Part of stopping the cycle of these feelings is to identify triggers. What events or situations are connected to these negative thoughts and emotions? Some caregivers state that they feel overwhelmed with their responsibilities or don't have any time left for themselves. Others may feel guilty for requesting or for using respite care. Perhaps connecting socially with others is difficult for a number of reasons. Social support has been proven in the literature to be a protective factor in many aspects of health and well-being, and caregivers are no exception. Social support is important for everyone, as a caregiver, there are several different types of support that may be vital for health and for well-being, and might help caregivers be the most efficient caregiver that they can be for the veteran care recipient. Many caregivers indicate that they feel some of their most valued support through their connections with other caregivers. Talking with others who understand what they're going through is extremely helpful. But how do caregivers connect with other caregivers? Those relationships can occur virtually or in person. For example, the Military Veteran Caregiver Network has an online network of caregivers and offers mentoring, support groups, and the ability to connect with other caregivers in a secure, peer-moderated environment. Blue Star Families offers caregiving events in many communities around the country, including several virtual opportunities to connect with other military caregivers. And the U.S. Department of Defense offers Warrior Care, which has resources for caregivers and even monthly telephone support groups for caregivers called Monthly Military Caregivers Virtual Peer Forums. These monthly peer support groups are an excellent way to anonymously connect with other military caregivers, to discuss some of the problems that they have been experiencing, as well as to help others. There's a therapist on the line who moderates these calls and is able to answer questions that they may have related to caregiving. As we have discussed, providing care for a veteran in a rural environment may be challenging, and they might experience difficulty accessing services and resources for themselves as well as for their care recipient. These challenges can lead to increased stress in life. While not representative of all rural veteran caregivers, about 21% report a very high level of stress in their lives. How can a rural veteran caregiver reduce the level of stress in everyday interactions? Different people respond to different techniques, but caregivers have told us a few ideas that have been helpful for them. Some turn to prayer, others use mindful meditation, yoga, or physical activity, and still others find stress relief in hobbies, creative endeavors, writing in journals, listening to music, or artistic expression. Some swear by engagement with animals or by group or individual social interactions. There are many caregiving organizations that offer virtual peer support and training. What is important is that the caregiver finds something that works for them. There is no right or wrong answer. When individuals take on the unexpected or even an expected role of caregiver, there may be financial challenges for a number of reasons. Sometimes the caregiver has to leave their job or reduce hours to provide care. Sometimes there just aren't enough resources within the community to help aid the family, and this can be particularly true in rural settings. Sometimes medical and other expenses just pile up, and sometimes the caregiver may have to travel further for appropriate care, which creates not only financial burden, but also additional wear and tear on vehicles. Again, this is often felt more commonly in caregiving that takes place in rural environments. What can be done? What financial resources are available to caregivers of veterans in rural areas? First, it will be important to do some financial planning. What is necessary to spend money on, and what luxuries can be cut? For some resources on financial planning, look to caregiver support networks. They have professional assistance as well as that vital social support that we had discussed earlier. Second, caregivers may be eligible for VA assistance. Contact the nearest VA Caregiver Support Coordinator, which can be found at the VA Caregiver Support homepage or by calling 1-855-260-3274. We've covered quite a lot in this course. Let's review some of the key topics. First, we defined rural as the geographically isolated areas of the country that have fewer people, jobs, and resources than nearby metropolitan areas. We spoke of some of the challenges of being a caregiver of a veteran in a rural community, such as distance to resources, lack of culturally competent providers, and common feelings of isolation. We've covered several important factors that impact the ability to provide care for a veteran in a rural setting. We also covered some of the ways to combat some of those challenges with techniques, ideas, and important resources to consider. Thank you for taking this course and for all that you do.
Be sure to check out our course materials for tips and takeaways.
If you have any questions or need assistance, go to the PsychArmor website or call the PsychArmor support line at 844-779-2427. Thank you for completing this course and taking that one step further in learning about our American veterans.